This is Jaime Chavez. Jamie's been at it for about 17 years, 5 years in the sports medicine clinic, and then another 10 years for a major workers' compensation company that you're working for in California. You have the group Discussions on Acupuncture Orthopedics. You've taught before. You've done seminars before. We are bringing you to the East Coast, to Syracuse, New York this year. You have seminars in April and August.
Thank you for that.
Excited. Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. Great to have you out here. You're a myofascial pain trigger point musculoskeletal specialist. I don't want to speak for you anymore. So if you have anything to add, go for it. How about a little more on your background, if you have any?
Sure. Yeah. So I graduated from 5 branches up in Santa Cruz, and that was in 2002. And been working pretty much in integrated clinics. Probably like after 6 months since I graduated. I started off with another group of acupuncturists. That wasn't going so well. Then I started working with chiropractors and physical therapists, and that's when I started to develop that passion for musculoskeletal type of things, and started realizing that was the thing that made me happy. That was kept that fire going. And I realized that I can't know it all. Can't even know it all musculoskeletal wise, but at least if I could just focus on that, that's where I developed that passion, is working alongside other practitioners and seeing how they operated. So I did 5 years in a sports clinic in San Jose with chiropractors, PTs, massage therapists. There's an MD there. And I really, at that time, got exposed to where I was weak. And that's where I said, okay, I need to hone in on these skills. And so ever since then, I've just been nonstop, like studying musculoskeletal things every day that I have a chance. Where I work now, I'm the only acupuncturist. We do have some on calls that come in once in a while, but I'm the sole acupuncturist at this clinic, working alongside probably about 6 or 7 different doctors. There's an ortho surgeon that rotates every week. There's about 6 or 7 physical therapists there, occupational therapists. So I just have all these resources and people to learn from constantly. And, I'm just very driven to keep learning. I don't feel like I'm anywhere close to where I want to be professionally. But I've learned a lot along the way. And that's what I'm trying to do, is basically share the things that have helped me the most to this point, so that other people out there that are just getting started or struggling with some of these concepts, just trying to make it easier for them, because it wasn't easy for me. And if someone would have been able to help me out in that way back then, I know it would have, meant the world, So that's what I'm all about right now, is just trying to give back to the community. But I'm not saying that I have all the answers by any means. I'm still learning alongside everybody else.
Well, for sure. I mean, even just within the realm of musculoskeletal and pain, you could just stay on that forever and keep learning.
Just pick one body part. You can spend your lifetime studying shoulders if you.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, like with your seminar, it's 2 body parts per seminar, but it's a lot. It's assessment and treatment, and you'll cover a lot of pain syndromes and injuries and things like that just with that. Well, what you see a lot in the clinic. You see probably a lot of shoulders, back, hips.
Yeah, that's just the daily routine.
Mm-hmm. So your webinar that we're about to start, and if I'm looking down, I'm also looking for questions and things like that. So I don't mean to, I'm still listening, but I'm also trying to that as well. But your webinar, Orthopedic Acupuncture Essentials, the Blueprint to Proficiency, you have a slideshow, and
yes,
I mean, we should probably just get right into it. You want to do that?
Or sure, let's do it.
Okay.
So let me load this up.
I'm going to go ahead and cut my video. And we're just waiting for the PowerPoint to load up.
Let me know when you see it on your end.
Okay. I don't know if if everyone can hear that dog in the background. I have a neighbor who lets their dog out on a lead, and when he gets bored and then he starts barking. Poor guy, he needs to go for a walk. Not yet. Doesn't even look like it's trying to load it up.
It's up on my end. Technical difficulty.
Which we did go through we did have a run through yesterday, so.
Yeah, I see it. It's been up on my end. I have the option of stop share and live at the top.
Yeah, live. It's live on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna stop sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, do you want to stop sharing on your end and then just start it up again and see if that?
Stop share.
Yeah, and then restart it up and see if that's gonna. It doesn't want to. Is there another window that's separate? But like you said, it's open on your end on your screen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, something was at the bottom there. Something popped up at the bottom. If anybody on chat wants to, if anybody else can see it, or is it just us that can't? Greg sees it.
Okay. Thanks. Hey, Greg. Hello.
Martin John just sees the desktop. So, yeah, Annette doesn't see it, can see desktop, but it's the actual PowerPoint's not visible.
PowerPoint's not visible.
Yeah, so for some reason it's loading it up on your end, but it's not showing on the actual screen. And yesterday it was doing that just fine.
Right.
Jamie, how big is the PowerPoint? Is it
like 20 slides?
It's like 20?
Mm-hmm.
Can it be emailed?
It can be emailed.
If you email it to me, I'll load it up on my screen.
All right, I'm going to send it to you right now.
Okay. That might be a workaround.
Yeah.
All right, so let me. You're mailing it to support.
Chinese medicine that works. I don't know if that's the right.
Yeah, we only have one. It should work.
Okay. Let me attach that.
So what I'm going to do is, if you stop sharing your screen, I'll load up the PowerPoint, and then all you'll have to do is just tell me when to change the slide.
Okay.
Okay.
It's loading. It's pretty slow.
We're going here in the meantime.
All right, I'm sending it now.
Sounds good.
Let me get off the share.
Just be another couple minutes, everyone. Jamie still has dial-up internet. He's in a very rural area of California. And
Still use mail.
he has a prodigy.net email, or he's still on AOL now.
We still like carve it in stone.
So I'm going to go ahead and download this. This will just take a second. And then there we go. Pull that up. At least you have Microsoft product, not a Apple product, right?
It's like a 2007 version.
Let's go to here, and we're going to view it as a slide show. Which way do you view it? Do you view it as, if you go to view, do you view it as?
So you go into You click slideshow and then from beginning.
Oh, from beginning. There you go. Bam. All right, so let me get out of this for a second because I need to go back into here and I need to share my screen. Share screen. PowerPoint.
Bam.
From beginning. There we go. All right, everyone, please comment if you can see that. Jamie, I can't see chat. I don't know if you can, but if you
I can't see chat, but I can see I can see some comments coming through live at the bottom.
Okay, so people can see it?
Looks good.
Looks good. All right, I'm going to hop on my phone here and look out for questions. And one last time, I'll just remind everyone who just joined on chat, please put any questions in Q&A. We might miss it if it's in chat. All right, yep, it's up. I can see it on the group. So go for it, Jamie, you're on.
Okay, so the reason why I titled it Orthopedic Acupuncture Essentials, a Blueprint for Proficiency. What I'm going to share today is basically an outline as a foundation. So it's just going to be key things that are useful for anybody examining any kind of injury, things that you want to implement at some point if you haven't in the past as a working foundation. It's not to say that this is the way that it needs to be done, but it's just something that I found helpful for me to establish that foundation so that I don't skip things. It's really easy to get caught up with the patient's energy, their stories, and how they will get you sidetracked from your thought process. And I literally have to go back and say, what did I not ask them yet or check? Because it's so easy to get distracted by different, people's energies. And so if you have that blueprint and you have that foundation, it's almost like automatic. And once it becomes automatic, then you can start to tailor off and, be creative with it. But you need to start with something, right? And so that's what I'm trying to lay out today and trying to make that easier for people who are still new to this, or even people who have been practicing this for a while. Because, I've been doing this for a little bit of time and, I still make mistakes all the time, every day, and I have to check myself. And this is a way to, have that check and balance. So let's go to the next slide. So, I have the group discussions on acupuncture orthopedics. Tao is the mnemonic that I used to create that. And a lot of people have different interpretations of what orthopedic acupuncture is or isn't. And I'm not on a firm ground to say this is what it is or isn't, but I put in quotes below. This is how I interpret it. If someone was to ask me, what do you think orthopedic acupuncture is? Well, for me, it's an assessment-based treatment. It's a treatment based on what I've found from that patient during my assessment. And it comes from the data that I collected during my intake, which is the subjective, proportion of the exam, and then the objective, the integrated physical exam. So I try to pull things from everywhere that I think is going to be helpful for me to give the best possible treatment. And it doesn't matter where it came from. I'm open to all ideas because it's really like one body. It's not, it's got to be like this or it's got to be like that. And I know there are some people who might disagree with me, and that's fine. And I just find that whatever is going to be helpful to assist this patient in their recovery, I want to try to use. If it's painless, if it's easy to integrate, and if it's going to help me become a better acupuncturist, these are the things that I'm going to pull from. And you'll see some of that later in this presentation. I'll give you some examples. Yeah, thank you. So what are the barriers to physical exam? So one of the big barriers that I always hear people say is, I don't have enough time. I see 4 patients an hour. I just don't have time to do a physical exam. And I understand that for some folks, time can be a major constraint. But one of the things about physical exam is just observe, look at the patient. We all have time to look at a patient. We have to call them in to the treatment room. We have time to watch them walk into the treatment room, to observe their gait, how they put their purse down and those kind of things, how they sit. The physical exam began as soon as you looked at them. So to say you don't have enough time is really not a good excuse per se, but you may not have time to go into the detail that, others might have if they have maybe 2 patients an hour. And that's my clinical setting. I see 2 patients an hour. But I could honestly see 3 or 4 because I've gotten to this routine where it's like, it's a little bit faster. But when you're first learning, it's a little challenging. And I'd say, my advice I would give to people that are still learning this is just integrate pieces. If you could just do one thing differently today, try to integrate that one thing until it becomes a habit and it becomes routine and it becomes easy. And then add the next layer. You don't have to know it all today. It's impossible. And nobody can know it all anyway. So just keep stacking layers to your exam and you'll become more and more in tune to really subtle things that you were missing before. A good example is I was treating a patient last week and she's got, forearm pain on both sides. She's got pain in her thumb. She got de Quervain's tendinosynovitis. She's a waitress. She uses her hands so much. On the first visit, I really honed in on the de Quervain's part of it because that was her chief complaint that day. On the second visit, that radial wrist pain was gone. And now everything was ventral. It was all on the palmar side. And that's when I realized, oh man, she's got atrophy of her thenar eminence because she has this history of carpal tunnel syndrome for the last 6 years. So it wasn't something I picked up on that first visit because it wasn't standing out on her chief complaint. So, you don't have to check everything on the first visit. Just focus on why they're here and how can you assist them to the best of your ability. And then, as you move to the next level or the next layer of what they're complaining of, then you'll start to pick out other things. In a perfect world, you would obviously see all of that on the first visit, but it's not a perfect world. Resources and training. So, nowadays we're so gifted to have technology, webinars, Facebook, YouTube. When we were back in school, I didn't even have internet access. There was no internet when I was in school. The information is out there. The problem is there's too much information. It's hard to filter what's useful and what's not, or what's reliable information. But nowadays, a lot more people are teaching, which I'm very thankful and excited about, and seeing all these different people offering training in these realms, because 10 years ago, you had like 1 or 2 teachers that you had to pick from, and that was it. And basically people would just follow that protocol. But now you're starting to see, hey, there's many ways to achieve this goal or to utilize this information that may be different than, what was being passed down before. The belief systems and bias, I come across this a lot, especially with my close friends and colleagues I went to school with, is, a big barrier for them to integrate physical exam is they just don't believe in it. They say, well, that's not Chinese medicine. And, I'm gonna argue that point, and this is my personal bias, but I'll show you a slide in a moment that just shows that physical exam and these orthopedic assessments have been around for thousands of years. This is nothing new. It's just hidden. It's hard to interpret if you don't know the anatomy like that. So, it's not something that was just created, orthopedic, it's just a way to communicate about it, but it's been around forever. And then the bias is some people say, well, I don't have to prove anything to the insurance company. I don't need to do that because that's for the insurance company. Well, I've heard many people say that to me, and it always takes me by surprise because I'm not trying to prove anything to an insurance company. I'm trying to prove something to the patient and to myself so that I know, hey, this is what I did and this is what happened. And I can see the result from that. And once I get that information, now I know that's a reproducible thing if it keeps happening. So if I do a needle here and it does this and it keeps doing that on different people, then I start to own that and say, hey, that's reproducible. I can count on that. So it's not about an insurance company or even proving to a doctor or communicating with Western folks and things. It's about your interaction with the patient. And I have every week somebody says to me, you're checking things and nobody checked. No one ever even took the time to look. And that develops that trust right away because they know that I actually take the time to care about what's going on with them. And if I can prove to them that this is where the problem's coming from, and I can show them how acupuncture or whatever modality you like can influence that, then, you know, right away, the patient's on board. It's a, you know, it's a recipe for success, I should say. This is a great quote by Yanda at the bottom. Time spent in assessment will save time spent in treatment. This is so true, because if you take the time to actually look, you end up having to do less. You narrow it down. You're like, okay, here's the problem. I don't need to use 20 needles to isolate this particular area. I can do it in 2 or 3. Not to say 2 or 3 is better than 20. I'm just saying it takes less time to do that. And then also, if you take time to find out where the problem's coming from and what's provoking their particular problem, you can help them get on that road to recovery much faster, and they don't need to come see you as often, which is not the perfect business model, but this does open the window for them to, you know, trust you and rely on you and know that they can come see you for other things. Or if this ever comes back again in the future, they know this person can take care of me. Okay, next slide. And I just want to mention to everybody, whenever I talk about this stuff, I get super excited. Even though I'm just talking to my computer screen, I get really pumped up. So if I'm talking too fast, you know, feel free to ask questions, you know, and I'll definitely try to clarify for you. This is a classic example from the Neijing Su Wen. So when the knee has pain and cannot be extended, acupuncture the back on the foot tai yang bladder channel. So if you first read this and you didn't know about anatomy, you're like, what, huh? Why would I do that? I don't understand. What kind of knee pain is this? And then when you understand the physiology and the anatomy and all these things, you're like, oh, this is just common sense. This is a neurodynamic test. You know, this is the same as a slump test. This is the same as a straight leg raise, where the tension point is usually at UB40. And you can see by the arrows there, that's the way the nerve moves. So there's going to be less movement at UB40 in comparison to everywhere else on that sciatic nerve. And the patient's going to have a hard time straightening their leg because of their, you know, irritation coming from their back, causing the sciatic pain. And so here in the classics is a perfect example of treating the back for the patient's knee issue, right? So for them to even make this quote tells you that they were observing patterns about musculoskeletal or neuromuscular patterns back then. It's just one sentence, but it opens the window in the door for all the other possibilities. So if I carve this in stone, I'm not going to carve every single possibility. It's going to take too much time. But if I can give, you know, people 2,000 years from now a clue as to where to go deeper, right there, you know. So that's a great example. And this picture is from Mobilization of the Nervous System by David Butler. Great book. Everybody should check that out. All right, so the art of physical exam. So there is no standardization, right? Have you ever seen anybody who does the exact same physical exam every single time? No, because it's an art. And it's, you know, until recently, it's been a dying art in the Western, you know, medical realm because of imaging and all this. But people are starting to get back into it. And it's really one of those things where, you know, you got to put your style, your personality into it, and your body type. You know, certain tests and things may not be comfortable for the size of your hand or those kind of things. So you got to find what works good for you. That's part of the one size doesn't fit all as well. So you also need to listen to the patient and try to figure out what's going to be comfortable for them. When I was first learning physical exam skills, I remember trying to do every test on every patient. And even though it was really uncomfortable for the patient, I felt like I had to do it. And I remember one patient in particular, I had one visit with her and she never came back because, of course, her memory and her feeling about seeing me is that guy caused me unnecessary pain just by touching me. So that was a good learning experience back in the days. And we just really need to like listen to the patient. We don't have to do it the exact same way every time. We just need to try to do our best to meet that person where they are in that moment and try to do our best to figure out what's going on with them. The physical exam kata, PE's physical exam. So one thing that's helpful, if you ever like study martial arts or, you know, Tai Chi, there's always like, you know, a form that you learn. And it's not really about the form. It's just about learning those foundational moves and then getting to this point where there is no form, right? You understand the basics so well. So when you're first learning physical exam, it is helpful to develop, you know, a kata per se for example, for the shoulder or for the elbow, some series of moves that, you know, are a routine that you go through in sequential order, if possible, if the patient's comfortable with it, that basically covers it all, basically prevents you from missing something. And then later, as you really get good with that, you'll start to take shortcuts and be able to, you know, get straight to the point, basically. But I took a great class with Shirley Sarman, I think that was a year or two ago, and she does the exact same physical exam on every person who has pain in their back down to their toe, the exact same exam. And her exam is so refined that she doesn't miss anything. I mean, it's just like you can see every little piece, and she's got multiple things going on that either help to prove or disprove the working diagnosis. So, you know, when I saw her doing that, that was just a re-emphasis of this physical exam kata per se when you're first starting out. Okay, next slide. So I came up with this mnemonic because I love mnemonics. Horse. So I kind of look at it as like this Trojan horse where there's something hidden in the body and we're trying to discover what it is. People who have studied with me before, I have tons of mnemonics that I've used, and this is the current one that I think I'm going to stick with because it goes in order on how I actually use it in the clinic. So the first part is the H, which is the history of present illness in the past medical history. So this is the subjective proportion of the exam, just trying to extract the data from the patient. But then the objective is the ORSE. So O, like I mentioned earlier, begins, you know, you start observing the patient as soon as you lay eyes on them, right? The R is range of motion, and this is a big one. S is special tests. This can also be known as orthopedic tests or provocative tests. And then the E is explore or palpate the body with your hands. And as a profession, this is one of our specialties, of course, right? So let's go through these. Next slide, please. So the H, one thing that's really like a mistake that people can make is treating too many things at once. And this is a mistake I remember making in my first couple of years in practice where, you know, I had the chief complaint and everything, and then the patient says, oh, by the way, I have some problem. I think it was my ankle. Can you throw in a couple needles for my ankle? And I said, sure. I did that without doing any history or any physical exam. She came back on the second visit. Her original complaint was much better, but she was disappointed because her ankle, I think it was, hadn't changed. And I remember that moment was just like a slap in the face. I was like, man, you know, she wasn't even happy with what she was getting better for. She was still focusing on the part that didn't get better, which I really treated negligently. I never really looked at it. So as a rule for me, I do not treat things that I don't do a thorough exam or history on. So to keep it simple, when a patient comes in with a chief complaint, I like to number them. So what is your number one thing today? Back pain here in this example. What's your number two? Neck pain. Number three, shoulder pain. I usually try not to treat more than 3 things in general. It's too much. You know, if I can take care of number 1, that's great, right? And if you can get number 2 in there as well, that's even better. But to try to get into number 3 sometimes can take more time or may not be as productive. That's my biased opinion, but that seems to be working well as of today. Okay, next slide. So when you do the history, the H, a really simple mnemonic is the alphabet, OPQRST. Many of you might know this already, but if you don't know this, this is definitely something that you should know. Everybody should know this. So there's different variations of this, but this is the one I'll present here. The O is the onset and occurrence. Basically ask the patient, how did this happen? How often do you feel this discomfort? Is it 24 hours a day kind of pain, or does it come and go? This is a very important question. Does it come and go? If it comes and goes, when you feel it, how often do you feel it for? Is it a few seconds, minutes, hours? Does this happen once a day, a few times a day? You need to be a detective on this question. I was at a workshop once where the teacher was doing demonstrations on students in the workshop for their pain. And a girl was sitting behind me and she said, you know, she signed up to be a participant, and she had this pain in her neck and shoulder. It was like a 5 out of 10, but somebody worked on her during the break and the pain was gone. And I could hear them talking behind me. She's like, what should I say? The pain's gone. She's like, just go, just go. So she went up there and the teacher said, so how's your pain? 0 to 10. 5. out of 10. Needles in. How's your pain now? 0. Success or not. The patient never had pain to begin with. So it's just a really good lesson for all of us to really ask and be very clear on what this patient is feeling right now and throughout the day. The P is palliative and provocative. What makes it better? What makes it worse? This is another vital question that people forget to ask. If a patient says heat makes it better, use heat. It's common sense, right? If a patient says that it feels worse at this time of day or with this activity, those are going to give you clues as to what's provoking their pain and preventing them from getting better as fast as they possibly could. So I had a guy just recently, we finally narrowed it down. His pain is worse when he wakes up in the morning. He's got upper thoracic pain. You know, he gets better after the treatment. It lasts for 3 or 4 days, and then he wakes up with the pain again. Well, when you really look at how he sleeps, he has a little bit of a rotation in his upper thorax. And when I test him, you know, sitting up and I rotate his thorax, it's the exact same pain. This guy's sleeping with his body twisted because he sleeps in a small bed with his wife and kids. That was the root of his problem. That was the root of him not getting better, I should say. So all the acupuncture in the world, the herbs, whatever, is not going to change the fact that he twists his torso every night in the exact same position. So if his goal was to be 100% pain-free, back to work, back to function, that needs to change. So those provocative questions are key. Quality, quantity. So the quality, like, you know, what kind of pain is it? Is it a sharp, stabbing, burning pain? That could be nervy, right? Or numbness and tingling. Is it dull, achy, more like, you know, soft tissue, muscle type of thing? And then the quantity, 0 to 10, that's a great question. I use it, but I wouldn't rely on it. Like I was saying earlier with that story about the you know, participant at the seminar. How is your pain 0 to 10 right this second while you're talking to me? How is it at its worst in the last 24 hours? How is it at its best in the last 24 hours? Try to get an idea of what this patient's feeling. Radiates, where does it radiate to if it does? And this is, again, you want to be as detailed as possible. If it radiates from your neck to your arm, like what part of your fingers is it going to? And how often does this occur? And how long does it last before it goes away? I mean, you'll see these patients come in, I get numbness and tingling in my hand. It happens once a day for 3 seconds. That's not too bad versus it never goes away. It's constantly there, right? So try to capture that. Sight is like, you know, different positions, like where, you know, are you worse at, you know, in your car? Are you worse at your bed, at work, when you're at the keyboard? And T is time, like time of day. Again, is it worse in the morning, afternoon, or nighttime? So if the patient keeps saying morning, start looking into their sleep position as a rule of thumb. Observe and inspect. So we talked about, you know, the horse mnemonic. We're back on the O now. And much more is missed by not looking than by not knowing. You don't have to know all the answers, but look, just observe and just start taking notes on what you see. Okay, there's a lot. This is a whole nother thing. This is, you know, you can spend a lot of time just talking about observation, of course, but this is a skill that you want to hone in on. Okay, range of motion, there's different kinds of range of motion. So there's active, there's passive, resisted, and passive accessory. Active is the patient just moves. Like, for example, I'm going to move my wrist, right? I bend my wrist down. I'm using my own muscle power to do that. Passive is you do it for them. And resisted is you resist that particular motion. That'd be more like muscle testing. Passive is more like length testing, right? Active is it's basically checking everything. It's muscles, tendons, joints. I usually just check active. If it's full, I usually stop there. If there's some restriction, then I'll go check passive. And this is really vital for some areas, especially like the shoulder. Like you're totally missing the picture if you don't check passive motion, because you'll never know really like where you think that restriction's coming from. So if they have a restricted active motion, then I would progress to passive. And then resisted range of motion I use with my own discretion, because, you know, some patients are going to be in a lot of pain. So, you know, I don't want to hurt them or cause them unnecessary discomfort. But if I find that it's going to be helpful in me determining, you know, how to treat them better, then I'll use the resisted range of motion and more specifically get into muscle testing, which is going to be even more direct, because there's resisted gross motions and there's resisted motions which will test specific muscles. And there's, you know, research-based, you know, approaches to some of that. Passive accessory are joint motions that the patient cannot perform willingly. Like you have to actually do this for them. And this is also very helpful. So I'll give you one example. Just pressing on the spinous processes of a person's vertebrae can give you a lot of information about which segment the problem's at, because you are gliding the vertebrae from a posterior to anterior direction and basically shearing the vertebrae. And if there's some discomfort or reproduction of their symptoms, it would give you a clue that, hey, maybe the problem's at this level, but I cannot willingly make my vertebrae like shear by just sitting here, without moving and so forth. So that would be a passive accessory. Special tests. So I won't spend too much time on the specificity, sensitivity, likelihood ratios, but what I want to get at is not all tests are created equal. Some tests are just better than others based on the research that's been done on them. So if you're not familiar with specificity, sensitivity, or likelihood ratios, that's something that you want to just take a few minutes and Google and research, and understand that when you do a special test, which is also an orthopedic test or a provocative test, some tests are going to be more reliable than others, and you want to know what you're dealing with. And just because it's not reliable doesn't mean that I don't find it useful in the clinic, but you got to take your results with a grain of salt. Provocative and palliative tests. So provocative tests are going to cause more pain. You got to use your discretion. Is if this patient's sensitized, or like I was telling you earlier, that patient back in the day, I kept checking and then she was in discomfort and never came back. So you have to understand, like, okay, provocative tests are going to cause pain. They're going to reproduce their pain if positive. So just, be mindful of that. But palliative tests will make them feel better right away. And these tests are very powerful, because if you can make a patient feel better right this second without even putting any needles or anything, that changes things. That definitely builds confidence. And then, you can show the patient that, look, you have some control over this. It's not something that has to be constant 24 hours a day, that you actually have some influence on how present this pain is. And so clinically useful, I just find, again, I just do a melting pot of everything, and I use what I think is going to help me to be the most efficient so that I get straight to the point. Explore. So this is one of my favorite quotes of all time, like, don't think, feel, by Bruce Lee. So you don't have to know anything. You don't have to know anatomy, all that. Like, you can still get great results, but you need to take your time, right? And to feel what's going on with the tissues and so forth. You don't have to know the name of the muscle to still needle it and get a great result. But taking the time to really feel what the patient's feeling and using your hands is essential as an acupuncturist, especially when using trigger points. So today I just want to use the extensor digitorum as an example. I chose this muscle for a couple of reasons. One, it's one of my favorite muscles as a starting point. It's a muscle I treat almost every day. And this muscle can teach you a lot. As you're going to see, I'm going to go through some different things here that just gives you an example of how special just treating this one muscle can be. Let's go to the next slide. So in general, just, if you're getting a history from a patient, somebody who hurts their extensor digitorum communis, I'm going to just start saying EDC from now on. It's going to be a lot easier. If someone strains the EDC, you're going to see some patterns about it. First of all, they may have pain on their dorsal forearm. They may have pain at the attachment points of the muscle. So if you think of a muscle like a rope, if you tie a knot in the middle of the rope, it's going to pull on the attachment points, right? So if the rope is attached to two ends, tying a knot in the middle, it's going to pull on those ends. And some muscles will cause more pain on one end versus the other. But with the EDC, that can cause pain at the wrist and hand, or at the elbow, or in the muscle belly itself. So it's just good to be mindful of that. This is a common cause of lateral epicondylitis. I see lateral epicondylitis pretty much every day. And this muscle is almost always involved, not always by itself, but as part of the picture. So it's a common RSI thing. So somebody who's on the computer a lot tends to get this, especially with poor ergonomics. Also, holding your phone, just gripping. These kind of daily activities can strain that muscle. Acute overload is another thing that can cause pain here. And I'll see patients who injure this muscle from literally just taking out the trash or something along those lines, grabbing a pot, and you're kind of gripping with the arm pronated. because that puts more strain on the dorsal forearm. A good recommendation to give patients, just why it's in my mind, is if you have a patient coming in with lateral epicondylitis, one of the easiest things you can teach them is just to lift with their forearms supinated. So they use their biceps, they use their anterior deltoid pec muscles. These are huge muscles. But if you start grabbing things like this all the time, you're mainly using these guys, and it's going to slow down the progress. So that's just a really simple recommendation. Observations. So you would look for malalignment issues. This is a little more in detailed. It's hard to just talk about this. I'd have to like show you. So this is just things to research a little bit, but you'd look at the position of their forearm, how they're standing. Is their forearm more pronated, supinated? When they talk, do they like to extend their wrists? You know, people who are very tense or very young, they tend to like just move like that, and they're more prone to these kind of injuries. You can just physically look at the muscle tone. So you'll see, wow, that person has a lot of muscle tone on their forearm. You can tell they work with their arms a lot. Or if they have some atrophy down by the lateral epicondyle, they might have a tear at the tendon. Idiosyncrasy signs is something that I just kind of came up with. So really, like, you know, just looking for the weird little things that patients do that they're not aware of. So literally, like, you know, you watch how they put their bag down, how they hold their phone, just all their little habits, how they hang their purse on the hanger, you know, and it's like, oh, I don't know why my elbow keeps hurting. Well, that purse is like 25 pounds and you're just doing exactly this motion, straining it. Let's try and do it this way. You know, these little things that can make huge difference. Let's see. So location of pain. So if it is at the elbow, usually like the hallmark of like tennis elbow is the pain is focalized 1 centimeter below the lateral epicondyle. So if somebody comes in with pain in that region, or they're touching the bone there, or the bone looks larger on one side than another because of this constant pull from the tendon, you're going to suspect, you know, these muscles, and the EDC is definitely one of those muscles you need to rule out. Wrist pain location, it could be anywhere in here, but I just circled the 4th dorsal compartment. I don't know how many people who are watching are familiar with the compartments of the wrist, but if you're interested in treating wrist pain better, you know, one of the things is just to understand where all the compartments are on the back of the wrist, because there's a lot of tendons that cross here. The 4th dorsal compartment is easy to remember because it's basically the compartment where the tendons that go to the 4 fingers is located. So 4 for 4. There's some other easy ways to remember the other ones, but I don't want to get too detailed with that right now. But if someone points to pain on the back of their wrist right here, you're going to want to rule out this muscle as a possible cause. So now we're moving into the R of the horse mnemonic. So range of motion, you don't have time to do a physical exam. You should definitely try to find time for range of motion. It's so fast and it gives you so much information right away. So, you know, this is just an example. Normally, I would check the elbow range of motion as well. And as a rule of thumb, you would usually check joints above and below the problem. If a patient says, oh, I'm getting some pain on my arm too, then you definitely have to check shoulder and neck. But if it's really just isolated here, sometimes my shortcut is just to check elbow and wrist. But if they're getting some weird pain referral into the arm, it's really unlikely it's coming from this muscle. It's probably something more proximal, so you'd have to check neck and shoulder as well. But wrist extension will usually provoke pain in this muscle. Wrist flexion can cause pain too, and it may not be on the muscle. It might be at that dorsal compartment, it might be at the elbow. The picture on the right of the person's hand, you can see, it's not too exaggerated, but you can see the wrist flexion, you can see the back of the hand, and then his fingers take an angle down, like almost perpendicular to the ground. So a lot of people, like this is a real subtle thing you can pick up on, will flex their fingers when they do wrist flexion, and they'll say, ah, my elbow hurts when I do that. If you literally just have them redo it with their fingers straight, connected to their hand, not flexed by themselves, and they say, hey, my pain feels better, that's a clue that the EDC is involved, because the only thing that you've changed logically is the angle of the fingers. They're no longer flexing, pulling on that string. So that's a real quick, easy assessment for the EDC. For wrist extension, while I'm at it, I just love to share information, so let me just share this. Wrist extension, so, oh, that hurts, right? That's really common when the elbow's fully extended because you're pulling on both ends of the string. But if you bend the elbow and have them extend their wrist and the pain goes away, that tells you that this is a local muscle that crosses both the wrist and the elbow, right? So it's either attaching to the lateral epicondyle or the superior ridge, like the ECRL, but it's telling you at least that this muscle is involved with crossing these two joints, because all I did was take the tension off of the elbow part of it. If you keep the elbow extended with the wrist extended, this is the hallmark of pain with tennis elbow. It's really common to be the movement that is combined that reproduces their pain. But here's a quick trick for the people watching. I just want to share this with you guys. Have them do it with a loose fist. So let's say it hurts with the elbow extended and the wrist extended. Go back to neutral, make a very loose fist and do it again. If their pain decreased now, that's EDC. Because what did you do? You changed the fingers. That's the only thing that changed. So now you've taken tension off of the string. So this muscle was getting cramped before with the combined elbow extension, wrist extension. Now you take some of the tension off of it, and now it feels better because it's not causing a shortening type of pain, a cramping type of pain. I hope that's not too much information, but I just go off. So it's just, these are little things that I've discovered over time that are really helpful. Next slide. Muscle length test. So this is just a fancy way of saying an isolated stretch. So it's passive. It's a passive range of motion. So here on the left, I'm just demonstrating on a skeleton. I've actually, I took pieces of, from different places, and I just used this method. I don't think you'll ever find this anywhere else, because I just combined it from other sources and came up with a method that I found to be more helpful and more specific for acupuncturists. So here what I'm doing is I've got the elbow locked in extension of the skeleton. So on a patient, you'd be propping up their elbow into extension here. It's almost like a martial artist elbow lock. And I'm flexing the wrist at the exact same time with the one hand. So I'm using my right hand in this picture just to extend their elbow and flex their wrist at the same time. That might cause pain all by itself, right? But let's say it's not. Now I'm flexing each individual finger, and I'm isolating which finger is the culprit. So the extensor digitorum goes to multiple fingers, but let's see if we can be even more specific and isolate the finger, which will lead us to the muscle fiber that one needle can treat all by itself. So this is what I mean about, proficiency, right? So if you have all these things in place, you can get really specific, and one needle can make a big difference. Another length, let me go back for one sec. The finger flexion you'll find in Travell's book. This can give you a sign that the extensor digitorum communis is short, but it's not reliable in that sense by itself, because there's other things that can do this as well. So you'd have to rule out the interossi, you'd have to rule out the joint itself, but it can also be a helpful test, because literally, you can do, some tuina or needle, and the patient can now bend their fingers and touch their hand, and their eyes just like, wow, that's amazing. And they can see it because it's right in front of them. Okay, let's go next one. Sorry, I'm eating up a lot of time. I always do this. I talk a lot. Manual muscle test. This is just resisted extension of the fingers, right? And combined with wrist extension. This is not a very specific test for us, but it is helpful in a sense to just see if the extensor digitorum communis is involved. It's also a test that some people use. They'll like karate chop the hand as they resist to check C7. Okay, next slide. I'll try to speed this up so we have more time for questions. This is a special test everybody should use when treating EDC, is the Mosley's test, because it's basically resisted finger extension. I'm pressing at the middle phalange, and it can isolate individual fingers. It's not 100% specific in that sense, because there's tendons that connect these fingers together, and it's pretty variable between people. But it can definitely be useful in isolating, like, look, I think the third finger is more involved than the second based on all the things you've gathered. Okay, next one. Palpation is the explore part. So for people who are new to trigger points, there's basically 4 criteria that are key. It should be tender to palpation. You're looking for a top band, a referral pattern, or a local twitch response. And you only need one of these 4 things to actually make the diagnosis, but the more of these you get, the more specific your diagnosis would become. On this muscle, you would palpate just like I'm demonstrating here. I'd use a flat palpation and I would strum over the muscle belly of the EDC. Okay, here's just this is like a visual thing that I thought about one day. So it's kind of like bases loaded, right? A single, if you get a base hit, it's like, okay, I found a spot that's tender. A double would be better, right? Get onto second base, and that means you found the tender spot plus a tight or top band. A triple is, okay, you recognize a pain referral pattern, or let's say like getting to home, that'd be also a local twitch response. And that's the hardest thing to get, right? It's like an inside the park home run, but a local twitch response is very confirmatory. So is a referral pattern, but you don't need those things to still be very accurate. You can just find the tender spot, the top band, and the nodule in the top band to be very specific with trigger point acupuncture. But the referral pattern and the twitch response, that's like if you see those things overlapping as well, then you know for sure like this is where the problem is. And then the home run really is just to find their pain. So whatever elements of this you utilize, you just need to find their pain. And it's often it's not where they point. It could be coming from someplace else, but that's the concordant sign. The reason why this patient came to the clinic to see you today. Okay, so the trigger points here, I just kind of label like these are the ones that I find the most common in this muscle. So Sanli Y is like literally next to large intestine 10. It's just like literally just on the extensor digitorum. The triple burner 9 region, it's like around there. It's not like a fixed location. Is more, I use that more nowadays for the 4th finger extensor because Sanjiao channel goes to the 4th finger, and this is very specific for the 4th finger. And then the LI8 region, kind of in that area, I use more for the index finger portion of this muscle. It's really rare for the pinky finger to be involved. It's usually these 3 here. So let's go to the next one. So pain referral pattern that's listed in Travell, which would be going down into the forearm and down into the fingers. But what's common for me is to see more of it in the wrist. Right? I see way more pain in the wrist or the back of the hand than I do the fingers, or the elbow itself. And then here's ruling out the possibilities. So these are all just pain referral patterns straight out of Travell, showing how many muscles refer pain to the elbow. This is just an example showing you that there's a lot of possibilities. And as practitioners, if we want to be good at treating the elbow, we want to know what the possibilities are. And we want to know how to test and rule in or rule out the possibilities. So common things happen commonly, uncommon things happen uncommonly. So the EDC is common daily as a cause of elbow pain, but these other things can also cause this pain, so you'd want to be aware of that and be able to rule that out if that's the case. Okay, I wanted to show this video. Do we have time for that? I'm kind of running behind schedule.
Oh, we're good as long as you are.
Okay. Sorry guys, I get carried away when I talk about acupuncture.
Oh yeah, how dare you? Stop, please.
I go on and on.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Is it okay if I stop sharing my screen?
Yeah.
That's it? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing it, and then.
So we had a problem with me sharing the video earlier, so I'm just going to prop my phone to the camera on my computer, and hopefully you guys will be able to see this clearly in regards to the specificity of needling the points that I just showed. Let me see if I can get it good.
A little to your left.
Left. How's that?
That's good. It's showing up. It's on the screen. Let's see how long Jaime can hold his phone still.
I'm like quivering. Oh, wait, here we go.
There we go, yeah.
And I'm just going to demo with the pointer. Not to say that I would use this. I just want to show you that how specific the needling is here. You see index finger twitching. See the middle finger, it's hard to see here. And this one's ring and middle. There's a common tendon that's being shared between these two on me. So you're getting both at the same time. Index, middle, ring and middle. Okay.
Very cool.
So that's just an example of the specificity of what one needle is doing. So if someone came in with an index finger issue and my needle was on the middle or the ring finger, it's not going to be as effective.
Want to hit some questions, Jaime?
Yes. Thank you guys for listening. I know I went off a little bit there.
Do you have any recommendations for osteoarthritis of the fingers where the bones are already fused?
Yeah, that's tough. Let's say what I would hope for that patient is just to get them the most function that they can out of that joint and to prove that the pain is really coming from that joint, because there's so many examples where OA is not causing the pain. It may restrict some motion. You'd have to check the joint passively to see how much motion there really is in that joint if it's restricted. If it's really coming from the joint, I think for me, my best bet would be to needle the joint directly, and then I would needle any trigger point that would be related to that area. So I would do the interossei, for example, or maybe even the EDC. We know acupuncture has an anti-inflammatory effect, and so I'd really be trying to utilize that in the joint, but also just to suppress the pain and increase the range of motion. Now, if I check the patient and measure their motion, I'll know if this is effective or not. And if it's not changing, then I need to do something else. Direct moxa would be great.
Actually, this question brings up another question. Do you have time in the seminars to go over the intake process a little bit, or will you be covering that? Oh,
yeah, usually my format for the workshops is always like, to get everybody on board. So I spend like the first half hour or so, kind of like I did today. And then that way people know what I'm talking about as we get into it. Because not everybody's on the same page. And, I always have something else to add or something to share as I go through it anyways.
Well, the intake process is so important, isn't it?
It's key, it's key.
So, could somebody ask here, I'm having a tough time keeping these types of ortho assessments timely. Is there a chart you use with check boxes?
No, there's not. The check box is in my brain. So I literally go in there with a blank sheet of paper and I just, chicken scratch like things. And, you start to just get into that pattern, but I know that it can be challenging at first. So I would just pick one or two things. And after the patient leaves, you go, oh man, I wish I would have checked Maudsley's test. Well, check it on the next visit. Say, tell the patient, look, there's something else I wanted to check that, that I might be missing. If they said they're not getting better, like, maybe can I check this other thing because there's something missing. I want to make sure we're looking at it closely. Patients don't care, they don't know. So if you didn't do it on the first visit, do it on the second visit.
It looks like you needle in a 45-degree angle instead of perpendicular and towards the fingers.
Yes, that's true. On this muscle, I usually do that. Every muscle has its own personality, and this one is really like, it's hot. It's a firecracker. It radiates pain like quickly, shooting pain. So I try to go out of 45 to cover more of it, but at the same time stay on that superficial level because the muscle's very superficial on the forearm. So I'm trying to get as much as the fiber as I can, basically, because if I go perpendicular, I'm just making a hole in it. If I go through it, I'm actually getting through more of the sarcomeres that are knotted up.
Andrew asked a question with a very nice compliment too. I've watched your videos on YouTube and you're always on the money when it comes to needling. My question is, how do you attain such excellence of the anatomy as most acupuncturists struggle in this department?
It's a struggle for all of us. I study anatomy and all this stuff every day. I mean, I literally study probably like 2 hours a day minimum during the weekdays. Weekends depends on kids and stuff like that. But if you give me free time, I'm trying to study anatomy and trying to get better at this because, I'm a slow learner. I learn something and I forget it. I have to relearn it over and over. but the more times I go over it, the more I own it. And then there's just this moment down the road where it just finally clicks. But I've had to like literally read the chapter of the trapezius in Travell like probably like 30 or 40 times, you know, and every single time there's something new that I learn. You just have to, you know, try not to do it all at once would be my suggestion. Just focus on an area that you're really interested in. Because like I literally spent a year of my life studying knee pain, and I put together a seminar for knees that I've never even taught, but it's ready. I'm like, but that process, going that deep and having a goal about it really gets you to, you know, delve in and go places that you wouldn't normally go with it. So, you know, if you can focus on an area, I would say is a good place to start.
Nobody's exempt from forgetting. You know, you have a ton of, like, you have a lot of tennis elbow lateral epicondylitis. You're going to remember it eventually, but you don't see it for a year. You're not. I mean, we have dentists and MDs of different specialties come into the clinic, and they're like, I don't even know what you're. You know, they don't remember their muscles. They only, like, a dentist is going to remember the mouth,
Right.
and the anatomy of the oral cavity. So, you know, we're not anymore. Everybody else is in the same boat as we are, and it's just once you see something enough come through your doors, then you're probably going to. But you see a lot of musculoskeletal, so that also helps.
Yeah, that's all I see. I should be clear about that. That's all I see. Every single patient is like ortho, except I've been getting a lot of concussion patients, so the exam's a little different and things. But you know, everything I see is pretty much, you know, ortho. I might get one tinnitus patient a year or something because that's work related, but it's just basically these things every single day.
What are you using as a point stimulator? Well, that's actually goes into a larger question. Do you use electric stim? Do you use the Pointer Plus?
Yeah, I do. But I don't, I should clarify because some people have asked me at workshops, they have this impression that I use it all the time. I tried to be more clear on the videos that I put out on YouTube and things that I mainly just use it for demonstration, because if I said that I was needling it and it was going to the index finger, it doesn't hold as much weight as if I can just show you that it really is, you know, and I use it more for that reason and also for personal studying. But there are patients where I will use it because after like 3 visits, I don't see the changes that I was expecting. Then I'll start, you know, integrating, you know, different modalities like, you know, electric stim. And as a general rule, though, I only use acupuncture and infrared heat for the first couple of visits. I don't do anything else. I don't do any Tuena, stretching, anything. I'm very like clear about, okay, what's happening with the acupuncture and what's not.
Okay. How long do you tend to use the Pointer Plus on the EDC muscles to reset or treat? Well, you kind of answered that.
Yeah, I honestly, I wouldn't. This muscle is such a firecracker, like, and it responds so well to manual acupuncture. It's not necessary for me. I see the changes. You'll do those tests, right? You'll see the changes really quickly. And it doesn't have to be like over one visit, and like, especially if this is something that's been going on for a while, but you'll see the pattern, like, hey, this patient's getting better motion, getting less pain. They're able to lift more weight. You know, it's consistent and it's reproducible. I've tried using e-stim and things just as like to experiment. And when I do those objective outcomes for things like the EDC, I don't see any difference. So I try to keep it as simple, you know, as possible. That's going to be as effective as possible.
A few questions that have a common point. Do you find it more effective when needling trigger points? Do you find it more effective to needle and just release a few twitches, or do you needle until the muscle stops twitching?
Oh, great question. I know there's a lot of different opinions about this, and I'll just share my view on it. I don't even think you need the muscle to twitch to get a great result. And over again, you see muscles that will be windows to teach you this. So for example, the quadratus lumborum, you put a needle in it, it doesn't need to twitch, and the hip hike will be level immediately after visit. The latissimus dorsi, these are huge muscles. One needle through it, no twitch, all of a sudden they have full passive shoulder flexion after the treatment. So those muscles are like windows, like they're like little teachers telling us it's not necessary to get a twitch for a muscle to open up. So my goal isn't to try to make a twitch happen. I do like it though. I mean, it's kind of fun. It makes you feel like you're bowling and you hit a strike. You know, it's confirmatory. It tells you, yes, you're in the ballpark. But the more you do this, you'll realize that some people twitch easier than others, and you have to look at how reflexive they are. So I haven't done this yet, but a clinical study that I was thinking of doing just for my own well-being, not published or anything, is just checking people's reflexes more often and noticing if I see a pattern of hyperreflexia and more twitch responses, because some patients twitch, at the sight of a needle. Other patients will not twitch, and so I don't think it's effective. It's just, it's confirmatory to tell you that yes, you're in the ballpark, but you can influence this by the positioning of the patient, because it is a muscle, it's a myotatic stretch reflex. If you stretch a muscle with the needle wrapping around the fibers, that's when it twitches, especially if it's at the tightest spot already. But if you elongate it by any means, via pinching it, raising it up, pushing it, like bowing the muscle, if you have them in a lengthened position, it twitches easier.
And the second part, there was another part of that, and the person Lauren mentioned, or perhaps it depends on the person and their constitution. That would be a big yes, I'd imagine.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Depends on the person and their constitution. You'd probably adjust treatment accordingly.
Right, yeah. I mean, I've seen some amazing things with superficial needling, like the red serins on trigger points where like you get the full pain referral pattern, which is barely inserted, trapezius hiked up in their ear, immediately dropped after the treatment. It doesn't have to be one way. I think it's good to know many ways that you can utilize it.
Someone did ask on the group if you have a video on the needling the levator scab.
I do. I have one on my YouTube channel. It's not, it's more of a demo though. It's not like an actual patient. So the way I would treat a real patient is different than the demonstration.
Anybody else with questions, please pop them in. We have a couple more minutes and I'll look for some more right now. Let's see. We went over that one. Here we go. Let's see. Of all the vast resources available, do you have a particular reference or textbooks that you go back to over and over?
For what? Sorry.
Reference. Of all the vast resources that are available, what's your particular reference or textbook that you go back to over and over?
Well, I would say, if you just picked one book, Travell's book is a must-have. That's like an aging of trigger points, right? Everybody has to have that book. There's going to be clues in that book on things that you're going to want to learn better. Like, they'll mention, with Kendall's, test for this and this muscle. And you're like, who's Kendall? Oh, that's Florence Kendall. And then she has a book on muscle testing. Then you get that book. And then you go, oh, okay, Carl Lewis, he's got this information out there. But there isn't one text. Like, to be 100% transparent, I have about 2,500 textbooks on anatomy and physical exam. And I use them all. I go back and forth, and I'm so type A, like obsessive about this stuff, that I want to see everybody's opinion about a topic, because one person might just say it in a way that just clicks with me, whereas the 9 people before it didn't. So I think whatever you can grab a hold of about the topic, just get it. It's worth the investment. I mean, literally you could say, I'm going to spend $500 on, getting better at treating back pain. And you could start researching tons of texts out there that are helpful. And if you have specific questions about like a certain body part or something, I'm happy to share what books I like about that, or you can always ask me in the future, or throw the question out in the group.
Discussions on Acupuncture Orthopedics is the Facebook group. And do you stimulate the needles all at once, or just insert them and leave them?
Oh, good question. I put all the needles in, and then I just tap them in superficially, and then I go back and stimulate them one by one with my hand. So I don't want to get Dutchy on a point right away, especially if the patient's sensitive. But also, if I'm going to be palpating around the area, I don't want to be pressing on the tissue and the needle moving. So I just put them all in superficially, and then I go back one by one.
Yeah, that seems to help too sometimes with a very hesitant patient or somebody that's kind of on edge. You can just don't break
show them that it's painless. Yeah,
exactly. Good stuff. Do you do point injection therapy?
No, I don't.
What needle gauge do you typically use on wrist extensors?
36 gauge.
What needles would you use on, generally, what's the range of sizes that you might use?
Anything from as far as like the length, like 1/2 inch to, I think the biggest one I have right now in the clinic's a 90 millimeter. I think I ordered some bigger ones just recently, but
for glutes
yeah, for the glutes.
I think that is it. I'm not seeing any more questions. If Eileen, yes, yep, this will be recorded. It'll be up on the group. We'll put it up on other areas too, so you'll have access to it either on YouTube or AcuVid's free membership. Again, it'll be left up on the group as well. Okay, let me just run through this real quick, Jamie, and just make sure I didn't forget anyone. Okay, did we talk about needle retention? I don't know if we went over that.
No, we didn't. Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really good question. So historically, I always retain needles for the full like 20, 25 minutes or so. And when I treat myself, though, it's weird because I'll just put a needle in and take it out, and I'm like, oh, my range of motion's better. And so just in the last year, I've started to like, do more in and out approaches. So like, let's say, for example, I have a patient who has pain on both sides of the forearm. It's tough to position them. So I might treat, one side, which is in and out, and then I'll turn their hand over and then I'll retain them on the back side. I don't know. I mean, that's a great question about like therapeutically, what is the benefit of leaving a needle in longer? And I've seen some research that shows that, okay, more of an anti-inflammatory response would happen after this, period of time versus, taking them out quickly and things. But for musculoskeletal, I don't know. I see the benefit quickly with just an in and out approach. But at the same time, I've also felt like where the muscles grab the needle and it's taken a little longer to let go of it. So I don't know if there's really a standard for that. I would like to, to definitely look into that more.
Can we do 2 more questions?
Yeah, I have plenty of time.
Okay, great. How much time do you put into studying Chinese classics or books on traditional Chinese medicine from modern teachers?
How much time do I put into studying, what was it?
Chinese classics or books on traditional medicine from modern day teachers?
From modern day teachers. That's a good question. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't read the classics that much. I've read the Neijing once. I didn't retain a lot. I usually, speed read now. I go through and look for things that I'll find useful. Mm-hmm. Like the thing I showed you about the classic example with the neural tension. Like that's something I'll always remember, but I just flip through books all the time. I mean, it just depends on what I'm interested in. I'm kind of like a dog on a bone. Like if there's something I'm really interested in, I'll just go for it and really focus on that. But I have a hard time staying with one thing. Like I won't just sit down and read the classics only. I'll be bouncing around from, I've got so many books. It's just like, it's overwhelming sometimes.
Any advice for those who have had multiple steroid shots to an area? Can the tissue ever recover?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of research coming out now, like since we're talking about elbows, about, like I think it was last year in particular, there was a good study that came out and showed that, corticosteroid injections into the elbow were actually leading to more tears. And that was a big study because a lot of the doctors that I work with and the surgeons, they haven't been giving steroid injections into the elbow for many years now. And I wasn't quite sure why. And so I asked one of the docs and he had pointed me in the direction of that research. And so I, naturally I'm like, well, what about the shoulder? They still do it all the time in the shoulder. And I think, if you search, you'll see there's a lot of examples of how that could, cause more probable tears in the shoulder as well. I think the research is still like, it's in the gray area. It's not like confirmed that it does this or that. So, it's not as astounding as the elbow research that was done. But, Chinese medicine tells us, on the microcosm and the macrocosm, if it's true here, it could also be true here. So as a patient, if I was going to have if I was having a problem with my elbow or shoulder, I would decline an injection. I would absolutely not go for it. But as a practitioner, as a team player with other professionals, I do not say to patients, you should not get an injection. I let them know that, hey, you might want to research a little bit and, ultimately, just make the decision that works best for you. But where I work, it's not my role to go against what other people are saying.
Do you use other modalities like cups or gua sha, and if so, before or after the needles?
Yeah, good question also. So yeah, I do cupping and gua sha, but not that often. Like I was mentioning earlier, I'll only use needles in infrared heat for the first few visits. And then that way I can really get a clear picture on what's happening and what's not happening. If the patient's not progressing, then that's when I start adding more things to the regimen. So yeah, I mean, I do gua sha, we have all the tools, and I do cupping and things, but Honestly, in my experience, if I had to pick one thing, and you said there was going to be a patient coming into the office that I've never heard of or seen before, you're going to lay all these tools out. There's going to be acupuncture needles, cups, gua sha. I'm going to grab the needle every single time.
Well, I apologize if we had a little, like, it broke up a little bit there. So
okay.
It happens with webinars. So I hope everybody got that. Do you incorporate motor points into your treatments along with trigger points?
Yeah, I think that's also a good question. And I think there's been a lot of confusion about that definition in the profession. So if you really research it, motor points and trigger points do have some similarities in the sense that motor points are, can be defined as pre or post synaptic. So presynaptic is, before, where it enters the muscle, and post synaptic is where the trigger points are at. So, trigger points, the definition, central trigger points are supposed to be at the neuromuscular junction, at the motor end plate. That is also a motor point. It's just a branch on the tree, right? So if you look at a tree with the roots, like the trunks, right? Roots, trunks, branches, it's the same thing. So you could stimulate the tree anywhere along that pathway. So that's where you see some of the bigger twitch responses from stimulating motor trunks in the sciatic nerve or in the, up in the brachial plexus. So that's happening at any point along the nerve. But when you're talking about trigger points, you're talking about that junction of the nerve and the actual motor end plate, which is the branches, the leaves of the tree. So it's a little bit more finite. It's more of a smaller location, but it's broader. So you have many more options on the tree of where you could pick a leaf, right? But you only have a few spots where you can hit the branches. So it really depends on whoever asked that is, what are you defining as a motor point? And what is your intention of needling that point? So if you're thinking the motor, you're trying to stimulate the nerve, for example, and you're trying to hit that, like, for example, you want to hit the median nerve and you want to stimulate all these thenar muscles. Yeah, one needle is going to do that. But if it's really just this thenar muscle, you could also do one needle to get that. It's just a different location on the tree. I hope that makes sense.
How long, usually how long are each of your treatments?
20 to 25 minutes.
All right, let me see. There was a question here that I do you see treatment variability in excess of deficiency pain? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, yes. So excess and deficient pain, like, I guess it depends on how you look at that. Well, so an excess pain could be pain that, it feels worse when you touch it versus like, oh, that feels good when you touch it, that kind of pain.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if that's what, but yeah, that's even better if you want to talk about both maybe, because I don't know what, this says excess of deficiency pain. I don't know if he means like symptoms or, yeah, it could be. I don't know, Greg. I'm not sure, but yeah, Jamie, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, if it's excess, so if the patient has like a, that jump sign with very light touch, you already know that whole area is sensitized. And so if you look at it from Chinese medical point of view, right? So that's more yang. It's going to be more on the surface. You could definitely impact that with very superficial needling. And that's usually what I'll do. I'll still needle the same spots, but I'm not going to, go for it, go deeply, because I already know the patient's sensitized. They're going to be in more pain after the treatment. But that's those cases where I use those half-inch serrans, and it's consistently effective in those cases. And you'll see that at each visit, they become less sensitized. They can tolerate way more pressure than they could before. And there's tools that you can use to measure that. Like, you can get an algometer and actually measure how much that is, but that's more time consuming, but you can just observe that too.
So there is a dose of needling that's important. You don't want it to be noxious, do you?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. You want to meet the patient halfway, so everybody's different on how they interpret pain or what they consider, danger, right? And we don't want to get them to that point where they have that feeling about us that every time they come see Jaime that they're going to be, be tortured, right? We want to make it a comfortable pain, like oh, that's an ache, oh, that's that sensation going down into my arm, and then they start to understand that that's a good thing, because you have to educate them. You got to let them know, like, this is what you might feel, and if you feel that, that can be a sign that the results will be better, but it's not necessary for you to feel that to get good results. But that's considered part of Chinese medicine and part of what we're trying to achieve here. preparing them, educating them. So I got patients coming in asking me like, yeah, can you get that? Can you find that big fish on my shoulder again? They look forward to it, but you have to train your patients to be the best patient, for you. And then if they're not, if they have some, if they're holding back or they're not quite on that level, then you have to meet them at that level, whatever they're presenting at.
So I know you mentioned that you mostly use manual stimulation. But last question, is there a difference in the outcome if you e-stim each point or all points at once?
Is there a difference if you stim each point, all points at once? That's a good question. I can't say I have the answer for that because I don't use e-stim that much. But that's a good question. Sorry, I can't elaborate more on that.
How dare you?
No,
after all this, you can't answer that. Jeez. All for naught, I guess.
It's hard to say. I'd have to do my own clinical experiment and e-stim them all at once. And like, I don't even usually have to go to that level. Usually they're already doing better before then, if they're going to get better with acupuncture at least.
Jaime, your next seminar, April 27th and 28th in Syracuse, New York, approved for 14 California CEUs, 14 NCCAOM PDAs. We're good to go with that. It's going to be on shoulder and upper extremity. So you'll be covering a lot in that one.
Yeah, it's kind of like similar to what we just did. Like, okay, here's how you check these areas, and this is the details. This is how you prove yourself right or wrong, and this is how you treat based on what you find, precisely. So I see shoulders and upper extremities again every day, and it's definitely a part of my passion. These can be tricky areas, but at the same time, acupuncture is so effective for these areas. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, we do have an early bird on it right now, so take advantage. That will be ending soon. It's in Syracuse, New York, a hot spot of a destination. Let me tell you.
Thank you guys for having me out there. I'm looking forward to
this will be a lot of fun and a lot of hands-on too.
Yes.
In this seminar. So looking forward to it. You have another one in August on neck and back.
Neck and back, yes.
So just wanted to thank everybody for coming out, asking questions. If I missed anything on the group, Jaime, you'll see it.
Yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in, and I appreciate it. Appreciate you all.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Martin, and everybody, Valerie, Min, everybody else right now who's commenting in the chat. Thank you, appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you soon. We'll see you on the group.
Sounds good.
Thank you.